Okay, it looks like we're recording. Sweet. Well, welcome everybody. Super excited to be here with you all. I did drop a link to the slides I'll be presenting. I'm a very visual person, so I like to have a slide deck. It helps guide me through what I'm planning to talk about, but then also I find it really nice as someone who's sitting in someone's presentation to be able to have something to take home and to keep. So definitely feel free to do that. And with that, let us see the presentation that I have. Sweet. Okay, so I'll be able to still see. Actually, can someone confirm with me that they could see my slides? I just want to make sure. So someone could just drop in the chat saying yes. Oh, thank you. Oh my God. You all are fantastic. Super fast too. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, welcome to the Pivot with Purpose tips on navigating your path to a tech career. I'm Jessica, and I'll be leading the session, and more on me a little bit later. But if you want to access the slides, please feel free to go to the bit link tech-career-tips. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm very much as you're dropping questions in the chat, we could pause, talk about it. If it's something that's a larger discussion, I might go, ooh, let's talk about it at the end. So just a heads up, I might um, let you know that it might be a longer conversation, but no question is too silly. This is your time, honestly, to be asking questions. Your time is very valuable as well. So please feel free to do that. And with that, let's do a little bit of level setting when it comes to statistics about coming into tech without a traditional career. So, according to Stack Overflow's latest survey, which was last year, they surveyed about 70,000 developers, and over 40% of them said that they did not learn how to code in school, meaning university and college. So, for those who are not familiar with Stack Overflow, it's a really popular website for developers to post questions and answers on technical questions. The report also reveals that a year over year surge in online coding education, which is rising from 60% to 70%. So that's becoming more and more common for people who are developers to not have a traditional science, computer science degree. So just wanted to level set on you are not going to be alone if you're transitioning to tech. It's really common, and it's not like in other industries, strange or weird. It's actually really normalized and it's encouraged too. So you are among a lot of great friends if you're making this transition too. So, like Katie said, I'm Jessica. I am a developer, an educator, an advocate in tech. I was at Google for about 5 years as a developer relations engineer. I actually taught for Hackbright, which is a software boot camp that teaches women how to code. I also taught a girl develop it as well. And I'm really active in a lot of community groups. That's my jam. That's something I get really excited about. And again, like Katie mentioned, before I got into tech, I actually worked in the nonprofit space for 10 years. So I worked with at-risk female youth primarily for 5 years. And the last five, I worked with people who had mental health challenges. So definitely different space of working with people to working in tech, which you're still working with people, but it's slightly different. And a few things that are not kind of work related is I love to spend time with my dog. I have a cute little puppy. She's not with me right now. I'm actually with my sister's house in their garage as well. And something else is I love to collect strawberry knickknacks. So if I'm in the store and I find a strawberry thing, oh my gosh, I like to grab those and like I love to collect strawberry things. So that's a little bit about me. And for today, what we're going to be going over is we're going to be talking about strengthening your developer skills, because that's key when it comes to making a pivot. My suggestions on how to organize yourself, my tips on regards to public resources, and then I have some suggestions in regards to how to stand out, and then of course how to network, and then how to frame your career pivot to employers. So I have a lot to cover today, and I believe we have enough time, but just in case we don't, again, the slides are all here, and if you want to chat with me separately, more than happy to chat with people at a different time and place and be more personable. This is kind of general information I would recommend to most people. Also, this is with, honestly, over the last 7 years, I've been coaching hundreds of specifically women and non underrepresented folks. into tech. So it's kind of a collection of a lot of things I've compiled together as well. And most of it too is things I've done too. So the first thing is that I always recommend is to make sure you strengthen your developer skills. So whether you're self-taught or you did a software boot camp or you're doing classes for GDI, however you have learned to code, continue learning. I would not recommend learning new languages or new frameworks necessarily. I would practice and get solid on the things that you already know. So if you really like JavaScript, stay learning JavaScript. Don't feel like you have to learn Python because of that, and vice versa. I recommend get really good at one programming language, because once you have a solid understanding of a programming language, then it's easier to learn new languages. Something else I also hear from folks is, oh my goodness, I can't apply for a job if I don't have experience within that language. And it's like, well, not necessarily. If you're pretty good at one language, it's usually a little easier to learn your second, your third, and your fourth. So I always recommend get good on your own fundamentals of learning. And everyone's coming from a different spot. So I just have a list of classes and boot camps, traditional schools. You can get certificates, tutorials. However you learn, I would recommend doing that. So with some people, it's I could read a blog or a tutorial and follow that. There's other people who I need YouTube videos or I need to talk to somebody. Figuring out how you learn is going to be your biggest skill that will help you with other items as well. So that's one of my big first things is whatever you're learning, try to go a little bit deeper, ask those questions of like, well, how does this work? Like if you're using a programming language and you're using their default sorting method, like I would even just look up, how does that work? What's the runtime for that? So we're not going to go into like how to learn to do tech, but this is kind of my recommendations of there's so many different ways to learn. Highly recommend to make sure that you're just getting solid in it. And Girl Development is a great place to do it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about kind of the other skills that I think are a little are not presented as much in regards to making pivots into tech. One of them, the first thing is organizing yourself. So I highly recommend to people, especially if you are in the job search right now, is to make a schedule. Having something consistent and that you know I'm going to consistent on Mondays I do this, on Tuesdays I do this, and being able to create a schedule for yourself is really important, and for a handful of reasons. One, it helps fight that dreaded middle of the night when you're falling asleep, that thought process of like, oh no, I'm not doing enough. Oh, I should apply it a little more, or I should have, and I should have. And those should haves, you kind of silence them by being like, no, I have a schedule and I've already planned time to be able to apply to study, to build things out. So it helps with that anxiety and that guilt feeling that you might have um, of trying to do more than what's realistic too. Another thing I like to recommend when it comes to making a schedule is optimizing those hard tasks when you have the most energy. So I'm a morning person. And so for me, that means I'm going to do my hardest tasks in the mornings. And then usually my afternoons are usually for fun. So that's usually when I do something creative or I follow a tutorial or I'm doing something social with friends too. Another thing I always recommend is be kind to yourself and plug in some social events, some creative things to do during your week. Studying 8 hours a day, every day, it's going to just lead to burnout. So breaking up your study times to be kind of good, solid 2 hour chunks usually is a nice spot. So then you have enough time to get really into it, but then you're not just studying for algorithms forever where you just get overwhelmed. So that's usually what I recommend coming up with a schedule. I also added a link in the slide deck to my schedule that I made literally just all in all transparency. I was part of the layouts at Google in January. So this is my schedule that I made for myself. So I practice what I preach. I only network or do networking things for only half an hour, like not half an hour during the week. I don't go around trying to be network person because that feels not great to me. But I definitely try to make sure I plan in some really fun things for myself as well. Oh, I love that. Yes. Don't forget to take breaks. Breaks are so important. Take your walks. Make sure you're keeping your sleeping schedule. Um, So those type of items, whether if I was in my house, I would actually turn around and show you I have a sewing kit. So I'm learning how to sew. So I'm trying to sew right now. So doing some other things helps your brain not get as fatigued because you're doing something creative and fun as well. So that's one of my recommendations. Make a schedule. Next thing is find community. I find that to be one of the key differentiators when it comes to the success of people pivoting into tech, because community is where you could find a lot of support and resources. And the fact that you're here at a GDI event just means you have found Girl Development, which is great, but there's tons of other communities, and you could cross pollinate, which is really nice. And that just means you go to one, you're part of two communities, and you could share resources of like, hey, I'm in this community. You could tell them about the events that are happening with GDI, and vice versa too, which is really nice. I just listed out a few communities that I've been part of or I'm aware of too. So of course, Girl Development, Women in Code, Pie Ladies. Oh, actually, something I want to highlight is sometimes it can be tricky to try to find the community. So what I normally do is I literally go tech, and then for me, I would go tech and then women, and I'd find a lot of community groups that have to do with that intersection of technology and women. But you could also go racial, ethnic, cultural group plus tech as well, or identity plus tech. So depending on where, like what you identify and who, like what values you have or what type of community you're looking for, there's tons of different communities as well. Uh, yeah. Oh, think of it. Yeah. Did I not write that one right? Oh, yeah. Okay. Uh, so think of it. Yeah, is a Latinx one, which is really, they were the place that I actually did my very first technical uh, talk, which was really exciting as well. So find your community, find people that are going to, bring you up, they're going to encourage you. I think that's something that's really fun to do in regards to being able to connect with others. But then it's also a great way to learn new resources because you're in these communities and people are chatting and potentially could be in the same place that you are. But then also, when it comes to the networking part, if you are part of a community and let's say you find a position you're interested in, and you have somebody in that community, in that job title or in that company, you can always reach out to them through that community that you have, which is really cool too. So, community could be for a couple of different reasons too. Okay, now we're going to pivot over to kind of public resources and things that you can that you could do that are on the internet. So first thing I like to let people know is to make sure you have the same picture of yourself on all your social media accounts that you want recruiters to find you on. You have no idea how often I'm going to interview somebody and I'm like, okay, let me look them up. I'm like, oh, I don't know if this person is this person because the images are different or like I can't really see them. And so I always recommend make sure your images are the same on social media that are the social medias that you want people to find about you too. So it's a really simple thing, but this is also because we're aiming to recruiters. If you're looking for work, you want to make it as easy as possible to recruiters too. So that's one thing I recommend. Another thing is make sure when it comes to all of the websites and social media that you want employers to find or recruiters to find, for you to be pointing to the same website. So they kind of connect. So if someone finds me on LinkedIn, they can find my website and they can find all my stuff. They can find my GitHub, my Instagram, they can find everything. Vice versa. If someone finds me on GitHub, it could take them to other places who can actually connect to me. So making sure that all of your public facing content points to the same spot or point to one another. I find it easier just to point to my website, and then from there people can find the other materials that I might have. So now this is specifically for LinkedIn. Something I really recommend for folks is if you're doing a tutorial, a project, especially if you're doing a project with somebody, add that to your LinkedIn. That is a great way for, especially if you add it, if you're doing it with somebody, then from that person's LinkedIn, they could see that they did a project with you and people could find you through them too. So definitely add projects that you're proud of to LinkedIn. And especially if you're doing a project with somebody, um, and if you're in a community group, you can always, just ask in generally their Slack channel or Discord if someone wants to do a project together. So that's another way you kind of connect with other people. Another thing I tell folks is to remove any junior from your job title or that you're looking for, that you're a junior developer. People don't need to know that. That kind of pigeons you in a different spot, and it's not helping you, nor is it helping the recruiter as well, because they're going to be like, oh, you're not going to be the right fit automatically versus really evaluating you. And honestly, it is your job is not to go, do I qualify for the role I'm applying for? That is not your job. It is the company's job to figure out if you have the skills that meet with what they want to do. And so that's where I like to put, you don't have to put junior if they'll be able to see that how much experience you do or don't have. So remove any junior references. And then something else that you could do is on LinkedIn, you could put yourself as open to work as well. So you could have it where everyone sees it or just recruiters. So I recommend to have it just so recruiters could see it if you have a job, because it's always good to have people find you later, even if you have a job. And then, of course, if you are looking for work, make sure that you put it so that everyone knows. That way, you could find um, work faster. People know that you're in the business to find a job. And if you want to know how to do that, I also have a link in the slide on how to get to that page. So then you could choose when it comes to letting just recruiters or the whole world know on LinkedIn if you're open to work. Okay, so now I'm pivoting over to some suggestions for standing out. And these are optional. I'm going to stress that really strongly because not everybody is the same. And I'm giving kind of general advice right now. So this is what I recommend to most people. But again, don't feel like you have to do all the things now. The things I'll be recommending kind of build onto one another. So anytime you are building or learning, whether that be you're building something from scratch or you're following a code lab or tutorial, make sure you post it on GitHub. I know that could be a little terrifying if you are not used to other people seeing your code, but it's really important to post your code on GitHub. And if you don't know what GitHub is, that is A-okay. It is a website where developers can post their code and anyone can see it. You could pay to have private spaces so no one sees it, but generally most people keep it public so then other folks could find you. And I know I know a lot of hiring managers who actually go to GitHub and try to find people who have experience with JavaScript with a particular tool. They do a search on there, and then from that list, they'll reach out to those people because they're looking for that skill set. So anytime you're learning something, make sure you post it on GitHub and take a moment to write a fantastic README. If you're not familiar with READMEs, they are a file that is pretty consistent within the industry that you could explain different items of the whole project. So the file is usually all caps readme.md. Tons of great websites to learn how to write great READMEs. But the big thing that you want to make sure that you have, and actually let me show you an example that I have, especially depending on the project. The project I'm showing here is a project that was a full web app. So I showed screenshots. I was explicit on the technologies I use. So I didn't assume that the recruiter or the hiring manager is going to be able to like go through my code. So I have a section that says technology. I use Python, I use Flask, I use this, and I list out all the technologies because it makes it easier for recruiters to understand because they're usually not as technical. But then too, if someone's doing a search on a specific tool, I'll show up, which is nice. And then always, always, always to make sure at the end to write a little spot about how people could find you. Because this is the point of GitHub and posting anything like this. They could find it and then they could find your LinkedIn, your website, whatever the case may be. So make sure you definitely do that. Thank you so much for saying that's beautiful. I don't think it's beautiful because I built it, but other people could look at it and be like, oh, that looks really cool. But again, uh, the purpose of this is to make it easier for recruiters to find you and to go, oh, wow, this person goes the extra mile to self-document to make it easier for people to learn. That's a skill set that most employers really want to have in their employees. So, and if you're interested in learning more on how leveraging Git and GitHub, I highly recommend tomorrow. Jessica, she is actually having a talk all about this. So she is going to really do a deep dive on this. But again, README's fantastic. Spend a little bit of time to write out a README for every project you write, even if it's something small. You know, if you're doing a tutorial, just write a little schmear of what it is and like take a little couple of screenshots. People will be like, oh my gosh, this is cool. So the next thing I recommend is to blog. Um, Blogging does a couple of things. One, it helps with your own learning because you've consumed information, right? Or you've created something on scratch, but then it helps you articulate what the words that you would use to explain to someone else. So it really gets your brain thinking about things in a different way and how you explain things. So it helps really solidify your own learning. Plus, you're practicing using tech words. I remember when I was learning how to code, I remember being really shy and being like, it instantiated and like we're going to iterate over the for loop and feeling really insecure. But by typing these words, I got a little bit more practice with like using them in everyday conversation by blogging as well. Again, when it comes to the blog itself, it's really great for recruiters to find you because they could kind of read a little bit about what you've done and be able to see the difference between someone who just did the tutorial and someone who blogged about it is a big difference. And so this again will be able to help other hiring managers and recruiters find you, and then also be able to see how do you write and how do you communicate, because communication is a really big skill to have within tech. So this is something that people are actually looking for. And then the last thing I like to recommend when it comes to blogging is, or one of the reasons to blog, is it's happened to me so often where I'm like, oh, I've done this before, but I don't remember. And so I go back to my blog and I'm like, oh, cool. And it's kind of my own personal tutorial on how to do the thing again. So I have blogs that are really simple of like, oh, recursion. Recursion's a big topic, but like some things I found interesting. So it's been, a few years. I've gone back to it and went, oh, that's how that works. Cool. Thanks, Past Jessica. So that's something I definitely recommend too. Someone asked, uh, where are we to blog? Oh, blog on your own website. So whether you have your own personal website or you have something like Medium, um, those uh, those are going to be great. Um, because of searchability, I would recommend something like Medium, especially if you're new to this type of space. And if you have your own website that's hosted on a platform like Squarespace, you could definitely blog there too because Squarespace has been optimized for search too. So that's a really great question. But yeah, I would definitely recommend blogging wherever you end up putting it. Just make sure it's searchable and findable. Something else you could do, and this is what I've done after I blog, I get that blog link and I put it in that GitHub repo of, hey, do you want to learn more? Go to this blog so you can see what I've talked about too. So, uh, and that way, if someone finds your blog, they can find your code. If someone finds your code, they can find your blog. It's all about making it easier for recruiters and hiring managers to find a little piece of you somewhere on the internet and to be able to find all of you, because that's really what we want to do. We want to make sure people can find you. So after you code it, you put it on GitHub, make a fantastic README. The nice thing is when you have a fantastic README, it's usually easier to write the blog. So, and in theory, you write a little blog. Then what I write, oh, actually, here's the blog. I forgot to show you my blog. This is an example of a blog that I have about, oh my goodness. This is just a different project, really small project in regards to, I think it was only a few lines of code. It was not a long coding project. But this project came to me when I was sitting with my in-laws are Korean and I don't speak Korean. And I remember thinking, I would love it if I could have like a real life translating, like the subtitles. That's what it is. Translated subtitles. And I was like, oh, that'd be really cool. And we don't live in the same town, so generally, my mother-in-law calls my partner, and I was like, oh, I would love to communicate with her better. And I was like, well, I could have it where she could text to me in Korean, and I could use something like Twilio to capture that text. Then I could use Google Translate to translate from Korean to English and then for it to text it to me in English. And so I could communicate to my in laws. This is totally personal project, something I kind of made up. But I ended up writing the code. I used it with her for about 6 months. It turns out the Korean translation from English to Korean um, doesn't use the honorific mode. So I was almost being insulting because it translated as it was peer to peer versus somebody who's um, of a higher like social ranking because she's like there's a way to talk respectfully in Korean, and so she didn't like it. So I was like, okay, we'll stop doing this. But I again, small little project I made, a couple lines of code. I wrote a blog post explaining it. I had my little graphic about there, and this is a way that people again could find me and can see it. And it's not technically hard or challenging or revolutionary. It was just something I had. And again, if you could package it up so that people can understand it, it's a lot easier for people to be like, oh, I know what you were doing here versus just having random code. So again, blogging about it is really helpful to create the story and the why. And of course, when people read this, like, oh, they understand me more and they could know, oh, I have my in-laws that are Korean and I'm trying to communicate and how important that is. And I can think creatively. So this is my little blog about it. And after blogging, my next step, what I did with my blogs was I submitted the blogs for talks because technical talks, I remember being really intimidated. Um, but honestly, I just saw it as a way to share my learnings. And so many times I've looked at different events and I'm like, I wish I could share something, but I don't know. I don't have anything in my mind that's good enough. But honestly, once I turned around, I was like, oh, I have this blog and I don't want to necessarily write a full talk and never use it. So I started submitting my blogs for talks as well. And so that's how I got into the public speaking kind of space because I knew the content because I built it. I've already wrote a blog about it. And really, from that blog to slide decks, that transition isn't that hard as well. And that way you could focus on your presenting skills and practice speaking out too. So that I found to be really helpful. I'm also a little bit of a I once I get going, sometimes I get really creative, and I actually started recording videos of some of my blogs, and I was teaching other people how to code. So here is a screenshot of me and my partner. We had a YouTube channel back in like 2016 where we were teaching people how to code. And those coding projects came from my blogs that I wrote, and those blogs came from kind of random projects I was building. So I started doing that, and that led me to getting more talks as well. Okay, awesome. I see there's a couple of questions in the chat. Could you get your GitHub link? Oh my gosh, you could totally get my GitHub link on my website, but let me just add that in to the chat just to make it a little easier. So here is that. And then I've seen people will say that, oh, thank you. That's well thought out guide. Jean, oh, great, thank you. Oh, you all are so kind with your words. I love it. Shows you're a problem solver and take initiatives. Yeah. Thank you for the example because I need to do some of this extravagant projects over 6 months to show. Yeah. Yeah. It's these little things that you could do, which is really lovely. Great. Again, these are suggestions. I'm not envisioning everyone's going to go out and be public speakers, but these are things that you could do because you're already spending the time to learn, to build. That's the hard part. Writing a great README, once you write it once, it's fairly easy to keep doing it. So this is just a way you could highlight it. And then once you write the README, transforming that into a blog isn't that much harder. It's a couple steps. And of course, from that blog to videos or to talks, the steps are even easier or smaller. So this is a way that you can really capitalize on your really investment of your own learning too. So great. So this is my recommendation. Again, not everybody's like me that wants to be a public speaker. You don't have to. If you like just to write and you're more of an introvert, blogging is a great way to really highlight all of the really great things that you already learn and know and presenting that to the world in a nice way too. Okay. Let me just pause one moment. I'm going to take a drink of water. Okay, thank you. So another another thing I would recommend to people is not only find community. That's really important. That I think is going to be something that's going to help support you. But then also if you are in a space that you have some time to volunteer if you can. And volunteering has different ways. Volunteering, I think for at least when I first hear it's like, oh, open source coding only. And that could be a little intimidating, a little scary if you're first getting into tech. Potentially. Not everybody. It really shouldn't be, but sometimes there could be these mental blockers that we might have. I know that was one of my mental blockers that I had, and it wasn't until I joined Girl Develop It did I actually contribute to my first open source project, which was the curriculum for Girl Develop It. But volunteering could mean so many things. It could mean, you could help run an event. You can speak at an event. You can, like with GDI, you could become a TA. You could become a teacher and share your information, share things that you've already learned, even though you might feel potentially like you don't know everything. You know something that the next person might not know. And that's really important. I haven't had that feeling of learning to code from scratch in a few years. So as I've gotten more separated from that space, it can be a little tricky for me to remember what was hard about it or what stumped me. And if you're closer to that, you can help the next person on like, yeah, I got stumped on that too, and validating their feelings and be able to give them suggestions and helping them out. So that's another way that you can support others. Other ways that you could volunteer with different community groups, as well as you could volunteer and help run a membership program or mentorship program potentially, where you have people submit and you can help match them. That's a really great way to like meet people who are open and willing to give their time as well, which is really cool. And then you could also do things where you could create resources and spaces that you would like to have. So let's say if you wanted something where you could meet with people on a regular basis, you could ask that group and be like, would it be okay if I created a once a month, an hour check-in where people could come and we could just talk and check in and talk. That's not a lot of work to do, but it is something that can place you a little differently. You can meet people in a different way because now you're the person organizing this. So that's another great thing to do as well. I know something I like to do, or something I did when I was transitioning, was for GDI. I started teaching. I became a TA, and I think my first class I was teaching at, the teacher Claire was like, "You're really good at this. Have you thought about being a teacher?" And I was like, "Oh no, I'm not ready." And she's like, no, you are. And it was really interesting how I kind of self-filtered myself out of like, no, I could just be TA. She's like, no, you could be a teacher. And so I started teaching and I realized how much I really enjoyed that. I also got really involved in other groups like GDG, which is Google Developer Group. And with that group, I actually ran an International Women's Day event where we had, I think, over 200 people attend. And it was such a great time too. So lots of different ways you can volunteer. Cool. So that's my little spiel of volunteering. Now we're going to pivot over to networking, which I know for some people, they're like, "Ooh, you don't like networking." I feel you. I hear it. I'm an extrovert, but I still don't like networking. I really think about it as a way to get to know people. This is a way that you can just chat with people, get to know who they are, what they do. If something happens, great. And if not, you got to meet a wonderful human being. So when it comes to networking, something I like to point out is there are so many roles in tech. You don't have to just be a software developer or software engineer. There are so many different roles. Um, Here is just a graph that I found to be really interesting, or at least the way if I had seen this before, I might have done things a little differently. But the y-axes are how much do you work as a team is on the bottom, and how much do you not work as a team. And then from the x-axis, right, from left to right, it is how much people do you work with. So is it something where it's really people focused, or something that's less people focused? And then there are different job position and titles, like just scattered within there. So you can kind of see if you're more of a team-based person, you might want to consider different roles, or be consider different roles. If you are more highly independent, you might want to do something that's more like tech writing or freelancing. If you want to do something that is very people focused, and that's something I really like to do, and team based, like I really love DevRel. I found developer relations to be something that is totally my jam, because I am coding some days, I'm going to events, I'm talking to people, I'm working the engineering team. I'm also working with dev marketing. I'm working with lots of different people. My weeks are always different. I found that space to be really, really exciting for me. So this is just a different way of seeing the different roles in regards to how a person might actually function, or what the a different kind of way to slice that same information versus just a list of different titles. So I found this to be really interesting too. So this is also linked in the slide deck too, and that link also has I think it's 23 alternate uh, career paths that one can have within tech. That's like software adjacent, which is really interesting. So there's tons of roles, and you might not know all the roles. So something you could do, where do I as a person land within that graph? Find that job title and then look people up with that job title. And then you go always ask them for an informational interview, which is pretty much all that means is, I just want to chat with you about your job. I have questions about your role. What do you do? How does this work? And you could always ask people, can I just do an informational interview? Just a couple of questions, just half an hour of your time. And most of the time, people actually go, yeah, they say yes, which is really cool. Rarely people say no, but honestly, people, when they do say no, it's usually, no, I'm so sorry, I'm too busy, which is really kind, or you might not get anything in response back, but that's okay. So I usually encourage folks to do networking this way. You could have something of like, oh, I'm kind of interested in this type of job potentially, and just reaching out to people, be like, hey, do you have some time so I could just ask you about your role? What do you do day to day? And you could have the same list of questions for each person too. So it's literally, what do you do? What's your hardest challenge? How do you know when you succeed in that role? What do you do when you get stuck? What type of projects, or how much flexibility do you have? So you could definitely have the same kind of set of questions you can ask each person too. So that way it makes it a little easier for you. And the hard part, or the work part, is just looking and asking people, hey, can I have a moment of your time? And that is really common within tech. You won't be seen as something strange or funny. Like it happens quite often, which is really cool about getting to tech. And then when it comes to the networking part of it, when you do find a job that you're interested in, something I recommend is, instead of just doing a cold apply, which just means that you do the just hit apply and you apply, potentially, I believe it's on LinkedIn, you can totally do this. But on LinkedIn, you can go on and see, who do you know that works at that company? Hey, so and so, can you put a referral in for me for this job? And most people will say yes, because if you get the job, they get a referral bonus, so they get a little money on the side. Not every company, but most companies do. So it doesn't hurt people to do referrals. Um, they don't have to know you super well as well. And part of your informational interview, you could ask them too, if you found a job within their company. So, hey, would you be comfortable giving a referral for me? And most people say yes. Worst case, again, they say no. They're like, okay, cool, thank you so much. And you move on to the next person. So I always highly recommend ask for a referral. It can be really hard if you've never done it before, of like, oh, this feels weird. And that's okay. And I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge that it could be kind of strange, especially if you're not in tech. It can be kind of strange because other industries don't do that. But in tech, it's very, very common to do that. So ask for the referral. It's not going to hurt you because even if they say no, you're in the same spot. It's okay. Okay, so now kind of changing to another space. So framing your career pivot to employers. And I remember this was a little tricky for myself too, of like, how do I explain, I was in nonprofit space for 10 years and what I'm doing now. Uh, this is where I would highly encourage you to sit down and answer the first question most interviews are going to ask you. The tell me about you question. And this is where you really want to sit down and go, okay, I need a short, succinct way of going, this is who I am. Let me highlight the best parts of my prior experience and what I want to do now or my next steps. So we're going to be talking about all of this. So there is so much that you already know as a person. And there's so many transferable skills that you could really hit on and highlight as part of your spiel to potential employers. Of course, a lot of it has to do with like being able to deal with challenges. You communicate. If you run projects before, you have project management skills, you have leadership skills, team work skills. Highlight or write down all the skills that you have that you really want to highlight that you want to use in your next job. I really want to push on this. Do not highlight the skills that you do not want to do again. Before, and you do not want to do that again. Do not highlight it because you don't want to do those type of roles. So make sure you're only highlighting the things that you want to do again or potentially do again. So make sure you're thinking and writing down just those key things like, oh, I was a teacher, so I know how to write a lesson plan. I know how to communicate. I know how to bring people together. I know how to conflict management. Those things are really important because they still happen in the tech industry. We're all people. We all kind of have the same issues no matter which industry you're in. So definitely highlight those type of information of the things that you already know that you've done in your past. And even if you don't have work experience, what did you do in school? What did you do in high school? What are the things that you know that you can be dependable on or that you can communicate out? So highlighting those things. And then when it comes to the crafting, tell us about you question. Um, you can always, there's kind of three parts. One, what did you do before? So highlighting only the transferable skills that you want to keep doing. So I've done this and I've done this and this. I'm a great communicator and I've ran and I've have had leadership experiences because I used to manage a team of 20 people. Great. Then how you've learned. So you could definitely share with them. I decided to invest in myself, and so I decided to go to a coding boot camp, and that's where I learned how to learn. I learned how to do web development using Python. Flask is my back end framework, and JavaScript and Bootstrap in the front end. And then any extracurricular things that you've done as well is really cool. You could definitely drop those in after that part. So you could drop in one of them. So mine would be, I used to manage a team of 20 people in my career in the nonprofit space. I decided to invest in myself and I went to a software coding bootcamp where I learned full web development. I focus on Python as my backend with using Flask, JavaScript in my front end, and also using Bootstrap. And you know what? I've been working on this project where I'm translating a text message from my mother-in-law because she only speaks Korean. So I translate it and then I send it to myself in English. And then I can text back to her in English and it texts her in Korean. And so that's something I've been working on, which is really fun. That is a couple of sentences that kind of gives you a good sense of who I am and that little bit extra that the interviewer could go, oh, tell me about that project. Or, what tech are you using within that? Or how do you translate it? And it helps continue the conversation as well. So you could definitely kind of have these three pieces to create that tells about you because you don't want to go into full depth of everything. But then you also don't want to just highlight, oh, I just learned how to code. So you can kind of give them a little bit of a story of who you are. When it comes to that interview space, and so because of that question, generally interview questions popped in my head and I was like, okay, if you're new to tech, these interview questions I would think about and try to come up with a response or something you would a project you could potentially use. And so some of those questions that people ask in interviews is, what are some principles every software engineer should follow? What are projects you're currently working on? What's the most difficult bug that you fixed in the last 6 months? So those, all three of those, you kind of already write them or think about how would you answer those as well. Um, when it comes to the most difficult bug, that's something I would really encourage you to think about. And the nice thing is, if you've been blogging what you've been like learning, you most likely will have a blog in all of your blogs that go, oh my gosh, this was really hard. And so this is where you can kind of just look back and be like, hey, past Jessica, thanks for identifying that. And you're not having to like try to remember all the information because you've already blogged about it. And so you can read, oh, that's why this was hard. And you've already articulated what made it hard and how did you solve it. So this is where blogs are really, really helpful in my opinion. And the next handful of questions is really, sometimes people ask for you to explain to them how something works. And this depends on the job role. And so if you're in web development, they might ask you, how does the internet work? Or how does JavaScript promises work? And so this is again where it's really helpful if you've already thought about these things, and these things could naturally come up within your own learning and blogs. And so writing out things that you might think no one else would care about is actually really helpful for you, for your own learning it and the way you could process information too. So these are just a handful of questions I'd recommend when you're in that phase to think about and try to have some type of response. And even if it happens where you're not sure, it's okay to be like, you know what? I haven't thought about that. That's a really good question. And you could pivot into something else potentially. That's a whole other conversation. We could talk about that type of stuff another place. This is all about tips to pivot. Okay, so I just want to end all of this with this graph because I know there's so many layoffs happening right now. And it could be a little intimidating of like, ooh, this is the time to get into tech and I'm not sure. So I just want to let people know I did a couple, I looked up a few places when it comes to the job market and like where are jobs right now when it comes to technical jobs. Right now, there is not a lot of jobs open for big tech. So your big, your Googles, your Facebook, all those big tech, right now there's not a lot of jobs. And that's okay because the jobs right now are at startups. Startups have a lot of money from last year's funding. And so these startups actually are hiring. They're hiring a lot too. Another space that I didn't know until I did all this research was non-technical organizations. So think your Walmarts of the world, the Home Depot, the Sephoras of the world. They are starting to build up their own in-house tech departments. And so there's a lot of companies that are not affected by this whole kind of tech layoffness, that there is so much work opportunities there too. So I would highly encourage you to also think of not the big tech, but also potentially big companies, but potentially not in tech, but there's still tech roles, which is really cool or interesting as well. And then after that, pretty much we are at the end. We have 10 minutes left, which is great. I want to give us enough time if people had questions. Something else I like to ask from folks, and I know not everyone does it, but something I really appreciate is if you have any feedback for me, whether it's positive, negative, neutral, if you could share that with me because it helps me level set on my presenting skills. And then also, of course, of this talk or this presentation too. So feel free to go to chatha-feedback or bit.ly/chatha-feedback. Chatha is my childhood nickname. So that's why I have that. But please feel free to give me some feedback. I would really appreciate that. And then, of course, if you want to connect, there's all my social stuff there too. So feel free to connect with me. If you want to set up some time to chat, more than happy to do that as well. And this is pretty much where if you have questions, feel free to throw them into the chat so then I can answer some things. Oh, we have a special guest here.
Hi, how are you? That was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Of course. Of course.
Such an awesome session.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I try. This was a really fun talk because I had so many things I had to think about of like, Wait, honestly, Kate, what I did was I have a doc for when I mentor somebody, I just write down notes. So
Hmm.
I literally went back to my doc and went, what have I been telling people? Capturing all that and making it into a presentation. So
Oh, so
this
good.
has been
You're
fun.
so good.
Thanks.
Cool. Does anybody have any questions for Jessica before we let her run away?
Oh, and you all are this group, this community. It's funny how like when you know a community is great, like I know that and I tell people that all the time. But then when you're experiencing it, it's like, oh, people are so kind and nice. Thank you.
Oh, they are. They really are. We just had another speaker who was managing some family stuff while she was speaking. Everyone's just like, it's okay. Just take your time. Like, it just was so kind
I love it. This is something that is so wonderful about this community. I love it.
all the time. We
Oh,
will
thank
share
you.
the recording and we can share the slides if you're okay with that, Jessica.
Of course, yeah.
Okay,
Let me throw that link. I think I added it in the beginning, but let me throw that back in there for my slides.
cool.
All the if I cite anything, I usually have my links in the speaker notes.
Okay,
So if there's any resources, they're definitely there, so you can have those as
cool.
well.
All right, no
Yay.
questions. Just everyone just saying thank you.
Oh,
Anyone else
thank
have a question
you.
or anything that you just didn't cover?
And people were asking questions throughout, which was really
Yeah.
nice. It definitely helps as a speaker because honestly, I'm just in a garage talking to a camera. So the fact that like people were commenting, I'm like, okay, cool.
I love it. I love it. Cool. All right.
Oh, Nicole, that's so kind of you. And again, if anyone wants to chat a little further, more than happy to. My website's on the slide deck as well, so feel free to reach out to me too. But then, of course, I'm in the GDI Slack channel too, so you can reach out to me on that.
Boop, boop.
I'm a tech lawyer getting to startups in Austin. Any insights would be helpful into emerging trends. Oh, emerging trends. Well, right now the cool thing is AI everything. So that is the biggest thing that's happening now. So if you're a tech lawyer, oh, that's an interesting spot to be in because like what are the ethical and legal ramifications of using other people's data for AI? I think is the biggest thing I would say. And then how do you protect people? And what about oh my gosh, so my partner is in a startup where they process the visual and audio
Oh.
to do some uh oh, I forgot the word for it, but pretty much it parses out to figure out sentiment analysis. So it goes, okay, this person's happy, this person's sad, and the percentages of that. And the canonical use case is call centers. So if someone's on a call center and they call in and they're getting angry, the support staff don't have to have as strong emotional intelligence
Hmm.
in theory. So it would tell you like, oh, this person's escalated. Let's bump them up to the, this other thing or this other script, or just give them the free thing or whatever the case may be. Um, but now they have some customers that are using it for therapy sessions as well. I'm like, oh, I've never thought about that. Like what the
Ooh.
implications have to do within that too. And how do we manage this whole AI thing? So I think that's a really interesting thing when it comes to law, tech, and what's the next space.
So interesting.
So yeah.
Cool.
There's an ongoing lawsuit against GitHub Pilot. Yeah, there's it's just AI is interesting. Um, oh, something I will recommend, or at least let people know, especially if you're new to tech, AI will not replace developers. Not right now. They still need us. It's going to be a tool for us that we could use to make ourselves to go faster, but you'll still need a person to figure out um, what to do or how to do something, even though it could code things. um, there is a lot more complexity than just writing the code, or at least more of a human portion of it. And like, I just want to let people know,
Mm.
uh, work will be different, but we will still need people
Yeah.
to do these developmental roles.
That's good insights all over the news of like what's going to happen and all that stuff. It's great.
Right? Yeah, yeah, and it can get a little scary too.
Mhm.
It could be like at least the news could be a little fear based and it's like, yeah, AI's here, but AI's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Just the public didn't know, or the public didn't have access to this.
Yeah.
So this is where it's just a little different, but yeah, it won't replace developers. Will be needed. It'll be different. It's kind of like I was explaining this to my niece. She's a model. So as I explained to her, I'm just like, well, you still need models and you still need photographers, even though we got Photoshop, 20 years ago.
Mhm.
Photoshop was a tool to kind of tweak things, but you still needed you still need these things. You still need the people part. And even though now we have AI within Photoshop, like you're still starting with something,
Yeah.
you know? So we're going to still be needed. It's just we're now going to be using tools to help us code faster.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Anything else? If not, we'll let Jessica go and we'll send out this recording and just go back tomorrow with the session on technical interviewing, which will be fantastic, which is another huge challenge we have a lot of questions about. So thank you, Jessica, for doing two with us. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Cool.
Yeah. And if you want to be LinkedIn friends, please feel free. Totally happy to do that. And so I just saw somebody mention that. So
yeah, we love LinkedIn. Which everyone here has a challenge by Arkita gave everyone a challenge to get as many as they could and to make a comment on like the event and like actually get like some conversation going.
right. You could do some technical or some informational interviews. Be like, hey, I saw that you did this. Can we talk more about that?
Yep.
Definitely
Try to get
continue that
something off
conversation.
LinkedIn from like kind of a boost of a bunch of talking.
I love it.
Cool. Love
That
it.
was great.
All right,
Perfect. Well,
Jessica, we'll get back to
tomorrow.
yeah, we'll see you tomorrow. And thank you so much for the time. And thank you, everyone. And if anyone still is ready for some more content, we're doing a maximizing mentorship session that just started about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, yeah. Go hop into that, folks. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.